This is a meeting of the Board of Education of the Warren City School District. It is a regular meeting held on December 13th, 2022, starting at 6:04 p.m. It is held in the Warren G. Harding High School cafetorium with live stream available at warrencityschools.org. This meeting is a meeting of the Warren City Board of Education in public for the purpose of conducting the school district's business and is not to be considered a public community meeting. There is a time for public participating during the meeting as indicated in agenda item number 11. Call to order. If you'd all please rise to salute the flag. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Mrs. Scortino, would you please call the roll?
Here.
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 Here. Here. Under the provisions of ORC 121.22, the Warren City Board of Education is recessing to executive session at 6:05 p.m. to discuss A, consideration of appointment, employment, promotion, etc. of public employees, and F, matters required to be kept confidential by state or federal law.
Yeah. C.
C also.
Read it.
Thank you. See also, conference with an attorney regarding involving pending legal action.
So moved.
Mrs. Scortino? Second.
Yes.
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 Yes. Mrs. Cortino, we're back from executive session at 6:33.
Testing. Testing.
Just got to get it close.
We'll move on to agenda item number 4, communications. Mr. Shiro?
Thank you very much. I have two communications this evening. First off, I'd just like to take a second to recognize one of the teachers at the high school, Victoria Midget. She had sent an email communication to us of something her students have been working on in her classroom. She was in conversation with her students, and she's a science teacher here at Warren G. Harding High School, and she was talking about her son who's deployed overseas and that she was sending him a care package. And the students asked the question, well, what about all the others? Like, what happens? Like, do they receive anything? And she said, well, a lot of them don't. So through the magic of the hearts of the students that go through her classrooms each and every day, they have created 100 secret sailor bags that are going to be sent to her son's division. And that information, I believe Virginia's working on getting that to the Tribune, Bob. So if you guys have it or not, it's very soon forthcoming. So great work by the students. Great work by Miss Midget and the students at Warren G. Harding High School for taking care of our armed forces. So that was some very great news going on here. And then I also, my second communication this evening and my last communication, I wanted to draw attention to the fact that once again, Burke Enterprises will be supporting children in the city of Warren by providing coats. They will provide 400 adult-size winter coats, 400 youth winter coats, 100 smaller children winter coats, and 600 scarves. These items are going to be picked up by the Warren City Schools Maintenance Department on Thursday and brought to Jefferson Pre-K through 8 school. Thank you, Mrs. Washington, for your staff and the work that you guys do. Each year, we use the small gym to set up an area, and we have a number of organizations that will be coming in on that day between 10 and 12 on Monday, December 19th. So we're going to bring the items over to Jefferson Thursday afternoon. Our 21st century students will be helping to sort the sizes and prepare them. We have some pre-orders that we'll organize for them. They'll also spend some time on Friday. Monday morning, we will get it going and get those items out to the community. I see the weather is getting colder, so for some of our families and students in the community, it couldn't come at a better time. So I definitely want to thank Liz O'Brien at Burke Enterprises and everyone who makes that a reality for children across the city of Warren. That concludes my communications for this evening.
Thank you, Mr. Shiro. May I have a motion to adopt the agenda?
So moved.
Second?
Thank you. Mrs. Cortino, would you please call the roll?
Mr. Walker? Yes. Mrs. Doherty?
Yes.
Mrs. Patterson?
Yes.
Mrs. Lamperos?
Yes.
And Mr. Fowley?
Yes. Item number 6, the treasurer's report. Mrs. Cortino.
I have nothing for you tonight.
Thank you. Item 7, the superintendent's report. Mr. Shiro.
If I could have a volunteer to read the resolution of condolence for Latricia Hall, please.
I'll read it.
Thank
The
you.
resolution of condolence for Latricia Hall. Is recommended the resolution listed below extending the sympathy of Warren City Board of Education and Superintendent of Schools to the family, friends, and co-workers of Latricia Hall to be approved as submitted. Whereas the death of Ms. Hall has brought sadness to the school district and the many people with whom she worked. And whereas Latricia joined the Warren City Schools in late 2009 as a substitute teacher and in 2017 transitioned to the position of school community liaison, which she worked until her passing, most recently assigned to Warren G. Harding High School. During her time with us, Latricia was a friend and colleague to many, keeping the interests of children as her focus. Latricia was an individual with strong faith and should be admired for that, as well as all of the lives she impacted in the city of Warren over the years. Now therefore be it resolved that Board President John Fowley, Vice President Regina Patterson, Board members Jenna Daugherty, Patricia Lamperos, and Julian Walker, the Superintendent of Schools Steve Shiro, expressed their condolences to the family, friends, and co-workers, and be it further resolved that this message of sympathy be spread across the minutes of this meeting.
Second.
Mrs. Scortino, would you please call the roll?
Mr. Walker?
Yes.
Mrs. Lamperos?
Yes.
Mrs. Patterson?
Yes.
Mrs. Doherty?
Yes.
And Mr. Fowley?
Yes. Item 8, Board of Education Committee Reports. Athletics.
Good evening, everyone.
Good evening.
Winter sports are underway. Basketball, bowling, swimming. We held a swim meet here Saturday with about 7 teams from the Akron-Canton area, as long as the Mahoning Valley teams. And basically, can't get enough praise from the people coming in, looking at our facilities. They're just amazed at our pool. They've got an opportunity to come through our buildings now that they've never seen this part of it. So just so many compliments of our beautiful building, and we tell them how old it is. They're like, wow, unbelievable. So I always give kudos to our janitors for the great job that they do with maintaining our building. Boys volleyball update. As you know, that the state has allowed boys volleyball to take place. We have sign-ups. We've had about 15 boys sign up right now. We're in the process of finalizing the job description and posting the position for a coach. So that's where we're at with that. Esports update, once again, similar to the boys volleyball, finalizing the job description and the job posting. I believe those may end up going up tomorrow, possibly, Mr. Shiro?
As early as tomorrow.
Okay, very good. Basically, that's about it, short but sweet. Happy holidays to everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And Athletic Council, Thursday that was scheduled, that's kind of the gist of what the Athletic Council was going to be, so I'm not sure if you guys are okay with,
Not having a meeting, yes, that's fine.
correct. I wanted you to say it.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Run.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Financial Advisory, Mrs. Doherty.
Nothing to update on.
Thank you. C, Board Policies and Guidelines, Mrs. Doherty and Mrs. Patterson.
I have nothing.
Nope. Nothing.
Thank you. D, Legislative Liaison, Mrs. Lamperos and Mr. Walker.
Just check your emails. I know I saw that the certificates for your attendance at Capitol Conference came through. And they're
Thank
in
you.
your Neoman email.
Item E, TCTC Board Representative, that would be Mrs. Patterson.
Yes, I have 2 things. Excuse me. The TCTC just did their Hall of Fame, and one of the people that they recognized was a man by the name of Larry Crawford. Mr. Crawford started his career here at Warren G. Harding High School in 1971 as a geography teacher whom I had. So it was so good to see him, and his wife. She ended up being the steno block instructor, and she was my instructor. So it was very good to see them and their families. The second thing I had is, I know we've all heard of the Apple Distinguished Award. TCTC, this is their 3rd consecutive year earning that award. Kudos to them. That's it.
Thank you. Old business, is there any to be considered? New business. We'll move to the treasurer's recommendations. Item number 1, Mrs. Lamperos, please.
Minutes. It is recommended the resolution listed below regarding the November 2022 board minutes be approved as submitted.
Second?
Mrs. Scortino, any questions or concerns? Mrs. Scortino, would you please call the roll?
Mrs. Lamperos?
Yes.
Mrs. Doherty?
Yes.
Mrs. Patterson?
Yes.
Mr. Walker?
Yes.
Mr. Fowley?
Yes, and the motion carries. On page 5, the monthly financial statement. Mrs. Doherty.
Monthly financial statement. It is recommended the resolution listed below regarding the November 2022 financial statement and short-term investments made by the treasurer during November 2022, Exhibit A, page 35 through 36, be approved as submitted.
Second.
Any questions or concerns? Mrs. Scortino, would you please call the roll?
Mrs. Doherty?
Yes.
Mrs. Patterson?
Yes.
Mr. Walker?
Yes.
Mrs. Lamperos?
Yes.
Mr. Fowley?
Yes, and the motion carries. On page 7, Mrs. Patterson.
the 2022-23 co-curricular budget and purpose statements. It is recommended the resolution listed below establishing the 2022-23 co-curricular budget and purpose statements be approved as submitted.
Second.
Any questions or concerns? Mrs. Scortino, would you please call the roll?
Mrs. Patterson?
Yes.
Mr. Walker?
Yes.
Mrs. Lamperos?
Yes.
Mrs. Doherty?
Yes.
Mr. Fowley?
Yes, and the motion carries. On page 8, Mr. Walker.
Appropriation budgets. It is recommended the resolution listed below to approve appropriation budget A be approved as submitted.
Second?
Any questions or concerns? Mrs. Scortino, would you please call the roll?
Mr. Walker?
Yes.
Mrs. Patterson?
Yes.
Mrs. Lamperos?
Yes.
Mrs. Doherty?
Yes.
Mr. Fowley?
Yes, and the motion carries. On page 9, Mrs. Lamperos.
Approve the application, accept the grant, and approve the grant appropriations. It is recommended the resolution listed below to approve the application, accept the grant, and approve grant appropriations A and B be approved as submitted.
Second?
Any questions or concerns? Mrs. Scortino, would you please call the roll?
Mrs. Lamperos?
Yes.
Mrs. Doherty?
Yes.
Mrs. Patterson?
Yes.
Mr. Walker?
Yes.
Mr. Fowley?
Yes, and the motion carries. Mrs. Doherty?
Alternative tax budget information. It is recommended the resolution listed below for the alternative tax budget information be approved as submitted.
Second?
Questions or concerns? Mrs. Scortino, would you please call the roll?
Mrs. Doherty?
Yes.
Mrs. Lamperos?
Yes.
Mrs. Patterson?
Yes.
Mr. Walker?
Yes.
Mr. Fowley?
Yes, and the motion carries. On page 12, Mrs. Patterson.
Authorizing declarations of official intent under U.S. Treasury regulations with respect to reimbursements from proceeds of school district obligations of temporary advances made for payments prior to issuance and making provisions with respect to related matters. It is recommended the resolution listed below to authorize declarations of official intent under U.S. Treasury regulations with respect to reimbursements from proceeds of school district obligations of temporary advances made for payments prior to issuance and making provisions with respect to related matters be approved as submitted.
Second.
Any questions or concerns? Mrs. Scortino, would you please call the roll?
Mrs. Patterson?
Yes.
Mr. Walker?
Yes.
Mrs. Lamperos?
Yes.
Mrs. Doherty?
Yes.
Mr. Fowley?
Yes, and the motion carries. Under Superintendent's recommendations, Mr. Walker, on page 14.
Superintendent's recommendations. 2023 Organizational Meeting and Board of Education Regular Meeting. It is recommended the resolution listed below scheduling the 2023 Organizational Meeting and Board of Education Regular Meeting be approved as submitted. And it'll be...
Second?
Oh, okay, I thought I had to say the date.
Questions or concerns? Mrs. Scort...
I have
Yes.
a question. I know we had discussed the 3rd or the 10th. Is the 3rd, that's going to be it? The 3rd?
The 3rd, unless you guys have a reason you would like it on the 10th.
No. The 3rd is fine. I know those two dates were brought up.
Okay.
The 3rd, okay.
Well, we had our questions and concerns. Thank you. Mrs. Scortino?
Mr. Walker?
Yes.
Mrs. Lamperos?
Yes.
Mrs. Patterson?
Yes.
Mrs. Doherty?
Yes.
Mr. Fowley?
Yes, and the motion carries. On page 15, Mrs. Lamperos.
Agreements, contracts, and/or leases. It is recommended the resolution listed below entering into agreements, contracts, and/or leases A through D be approved as submitted.
Second.
Questions or concerns? Mrs. Scortino, would you please call the roll?
Mrs. Lamperos?
Yes.
Mrs. Patterson?
Yes.
Mr. Walker?
Yes.
Mrs. Doherty?
Yes.
Mr. Fowley?
Yes, and the motion carries. On page 17, Mrs. Doherty.
Authorization for disposal of board-owned fixed assets for the period July 2022 through December 2022. It is recommended the resolution authorizing disposal of board-owned fixed assets for the period July 2022 through December 2022 be approved as submitted.
Second?
Questions or concerns? Mrs. Scortino, would you please call the roll?
Mrs. Doherty?
Yes.
Mrs. Lamperos?
Yes.
Mrs. Patterson?
Yes.
Mr. Walker?
Yes.
Mr. Fowley?
Yes, and the motion carries. Mrs. Patterson, on page 18.
Revised salary table M, classified hourly salary table. It is recommended the resolution listed below adopting changes to salary table M, classified hourly salary table, be approved as submitted with changes as recommended.
Second.
Any questions or concerns? Mrs. Scortino, would you please call the roll?
Mrs. Patterson?
Yes.
Mr. Walker?
Yes.
Mrs. Lamperos?
Yes.
Mrs. Doherty?
Yes.
Mr. Fowley?
Yes, and the motion carries. Mr. Walker, on page 19, acceptance of gifts.
Acceptance of gifts. It is recommended the resolution listed below regarding acceptance of gifts be approved as submitted. And we want to thank Joshua Daffin family for their donation, the monetary donation to the Lincoln PK through 8 school, value of $200. For KFC for their dinner box for every student donation to the Jefferson PK through 8 school, estimated value $4,800. Megan's Mittens for their donation of gloves for all third graders at the Jefferson PK through 8 school, estimated value $200. And the Pleasant Valley Church for their 100 Thanksgiving dinners at the Willard PK through 8 school, estimated value $5,000. And for Ann Putt for miscellaneous food for Lincoln PK through 8, estimated value $25. And for Peg Ramey for donation of art supplies to the Lincoln PK through 8 school, estimated value $75. For Bob Selman, Lincoln PK through 8 school, art supplies that were donated, estimated value $50. For the St. Mark's Church, for their winter clothing donation to the Jefferson PK through 8 school, estimated value $250. And for Turner Dairy, for their donation of milk for every student for the Jefferson PK through 8 school, estimated value $375.
Thank you, Mr. Walker.
Second.
I don't think anyone has any questions or concerns, other than great thanks.
Yes.
Every board meeting, the list gets longer, so we're very, very, very grateful.
And even the
Mrs.
Burke
Scortino?
Enterprises that was mentioned earlier.
Mr. Walker?
Yes.
Mrs. Patterson?
Yes.
Mrs. Lamperos?
Yes.
Mrs. Doherty?
Yes.
Mr. Fowley?
Yes, and the motion carries. On page 21, Mrs. Lamperos, and this goes through page 32.
Personnel recommendations. It is recommended the resolution listed below regarding personnel items A through M be approved as submitted.
Second.
Questions or concerns? Mrs. Scortino, would you please call the roll?
Mrs. Lamperos?
Yes.
Mrs. Patterson?
Yes.
Mr. Walker?
Yes.
Mrs. Doherty?
Yes.
Mr. Fowley?
Yes, and the motion carries. On page 33, are there any board recommendations? On page 34, agenda item 11, Mr. Shiro, did anyone sign up for public participation this evening?
No one has.
Thank you. We have no need of an additional executive session. Before we adjourn the meeting, Mrs. Doherty, thank you very, very much for your service. You have brought us a first to the Warren City School Board, the first mother of triplets. We're very, very grateful for your service. And would any of the rest of you like to?
Yes, I would love to say
Go.
something. I know life happens. And I know, you had to move due to your husband's work job or relocation and that. I was hoping that you were going to be my longtime replacement eventually here. As a mom, when I first joined the board, I had 6 kids. You and I have talked, over the years, and it took me 3 times to run in an election to win. And I was just so excited. The learning curve is huge. And but when you're a mom and you're dedicated and your kids are in the building, do not cry. Do not cry. You have a different, a different view of what someone who does not have children in the district may look at when it comes to your board service and to how your children are being taught. And it's not only your kids, suddenly now you have thousands of kids, and it's an amazing thing. It has been a pleasure to work with you over the past year. I really wish it could have been longer. I was quite surprised, but like I said, I understand that life happens. I hope that you take what you've learned in this year and in your new school district. I hope that you will venture out, get to know the community, and take your gifts there and impact the school district there. I really hope you'll be able to do that. That's my wish for you.
That was basically what I said to you at our last meeting, but I do want to reiterate what Patty has said, and that is take what you've learned and go make a difference where your children are going to school. I think you'll do great at it. I really do.
Yes, definitely. Your absence will be felt on the board. This last year, getting to know you and working with you, because I didn't know you prior, but it has been really great. It's been really awesome. The conversations we've had as the two newest board members, just getting the hang of things. So definitely, we'll be looking forward to seeing you still at events for your son. But so you're not going too far. You're still an alumni too. So, but definitely your absence will be felt. Thank you.
Again, thank you very much. May I have a motion for adjournment?
So move.
I think Jenna
Jenna,
should
do you-
do
Oh,
it.
Jenna
Jenna?
might have something.
So moved.
She's
I know. So moved.
I was letting her off the hook.
Second.
We'll let Jenna move it. Okay.
Mrs. Scortino?
Mrs. Doherty?
Yes.
Mrs. Lamperos?
Yes.
Mrs. Patterson?
Yes.
Mr. Walker?
Yes.
And Mr. Fowley?
Yes, and the motion carries. We're adjourned at 5 minutes of 7.